Um, and thank you all for coming, and thanks for organizing. Um, I'm going to start with a presentation of the project, and then we can have a more free-form conversation. I'll try to not go too long, not past the half-hour mark. Okay, so think of how many times you use search tools every day. Right? Think of just how much you depend on search tools for your research and teaching. Think of all the search results you've seen over the years and how they've shaped your ideas and interests over time. So this presentation is about the politics of search, and in particular, bibliographic search. Now, I want to make a distinction between two types of search. So first, there is known item search. When you already know what you're looking for, that you're looking for a specific item, and you use a search tool just to retrieve it. So we're not interested in that today. We're interested in so-called exploratory search, like when you don't yet know what's available, and a search tool exposes you to a few things among millions of possibilities. So the second type of search, exploratory search, or sometimes discovery, is our focus today. Now, a side note, what's up with all the colonial metaphors of exploration and discovery? I don't know. We can set this issue aside for the moment. Now, in exploratory search, if we use a dominant system like Google Scholar, it's easy to find the most popular results on a given topic. Right? So here are the top results for the query capitalism. The results are overwhelmingly works in economics, especially neoclassical economics, with lots of citations. And you have to go through many pages of results until you find a work that analyzes capitalism from, say, a feminist lens, or in a post-colonial context, or from a different disciplinary perspective, like the history of capitalism or economic anthropology. Right? And it's also easy to find works that are similar to the ones that you already know. So if I click related articles on the Milton Friedman result on the previous page, I will get a lot of works in the same tradition of neoclassical economics. Right? So it's easy to find things that are popular and things that are similar to what you already know. And that's not a coincidence, because these dominant systems like Google Scholar are based on ranking by popularity and similarity. Right? And the calculations of popularity and similarity are largely based on citation analysis. So a work is deemed popular. One of the key criteria for a work being deemed popular is if it has many citations. Works are deemed similar if they are in the same clusters of citation networks. Right? So this is true not just in bibliographic search, in a library context, but also in a lot of web search. And for example, Google's initial algorithm, PageRank, was based on the same principle of defining relevance in terms of citation popularity, but using web links instead of bibliographic citations. So this figure that you see in the slide is from the original patent for PageRank in the 90s. So it's important to problematize the idea of relevance. Okay? So search engine designers will often say that the algorithms are simply finding the most relevant results, what you're looking for. But that's not quite right. They're choosing to define relevance in a very specific way. Often in terms of popularity and similarity, involving particular methods for quantifying citation counts and clustering citation networks. So this choice is not neutral or objective, but it's not just a mere strictly technical decision based on good sense. It's a normative choice. It's one based on cultural and political values of what information should be more visible and to whom. Okay? So in short, search engine design is political. And there's a lot of literature in library and information science, particularly feminist and anti-racist literature on the subject, about how search engines, particularly commercial search engines, can reinforce patterns of exposure, invisibility, and marginalization. And there is special attention to how citations in particular reflect inequalities and exclusions. So there is even a movement, the Cite Black Women movement, that works to address this. And it makes sense that the movement focuses on citations, since citation analysis is the basis for the way that so many search engines define relevance, right, and determine visibility. Okay. So today I want to ask two questions. The first is, how can we counter the inequalities and exclusions, the inherent inequalities and exclusions of citation analysis? And more broadly, what are the alternatives to ranking by popularity and similarity in the context of exploratory search? Okay. So our project, Relata, is one attempt to answer these questions. Okay. So we've started in a field that we're most familiar with, sociocultural anthropology, because we're scholars in the field. And we designed a survey and sent it to colleagues at the Society for Cultural Anthropology in early 2019. So we asked these questions. So we asked people to say, so please identify an article or book that you have published, okay? And then please identify a few texts or positions to which you were responding in the above publication, right? So then we also asked them to characterize the nature of the response, whether it was a critique or an extension, for example. Now, interestingly, a lot of the answers to this first question were works that the authors had not explicitly cited. And so, in the back of their mind, they had some existing debate in the field that they were implicitly responding to. Right? And in the survey, they told us what those implicit analytical moves were. And then we also asked the same question in the other direction. So, can you think of any publications that have offered interesting critiques or counterpoints to your article? And so, and we especially encouraged them to give us examples of publications in languages other than English. Okay? And we also asked them to characterize the nature of their response. So in the second question too, there were many texts that didn't necessarily cite the survey respondents' articles explicitly. So the respondent would say, oh, after my article came out, I came across this interesting thing that made me rethink my original position. Okay? So we got lots of responses from that survey, and after analyzing them, we started designing a tool, the tool that I'll demonstrate now. We've launched this tool this past week on Thursday, and it's entirely not for profit, and it's based fully on free and open source software. Okay, so I'll give the demonstration now. Right. So this is what the tool looks like. So when you open it on relata.mit.edu, it will start with a randomly chosen. It will start with a randomly chosen a work that exists in the database and that has sufficient amount of relations and annotations, right, to be interesting to a new user and to be able to illustrate what the project is about. So in this case, we have an article by anthropologist Marisol de la Cadena. The article is called Indigenous Cosmopolitics in the Andes. So de la Cadena was one of the respondents in our survey. And as you can see here, she tagged her her article as an extension of this book by Isabel Stengers, or as a refinement of this of this article by Hale, and this refinement by and a refinement of this work by June Nash, right? And she also pointed out some some works that came out after her article that made her rethink what she wrote. So you can see those on this side, the things that respond to de la Cadena, because we're trying to show, we're trying to show things that offer interesting critiques and counterpoints to the thing that you already know, right? So we're emphasizing things on this side, on the left side, and you can see them with the annotations if you scroll. Right here. So for example, this article by Nicole Fabricant is a reanalysis of De la Cadena. So, and with the comment, without citing De la Cadena directly, Fabricant proposes a reanalysis of the political movements that the former discusses by showing how they exclude indigenous people in urban areas. Okay, so we're trying to move from explicit citation, right, that you can find in a publication, to what we might call an interpretive relation. Okay, these interpretive relations, they're not authoritative; they're interpretive, and they don't necessarily have to align with the author's original intentions. Okay, so any reader can come and say, like, I came across this text and I think it really poses an interesting contrast or an interesting critique or counterpoint to that other one, right? So that in our tool we want to expose readers of the other one to the one that will offer an interesting, fresh point of view on the stuff that they already know, right? So that's the basic idea. So to try to complement that what's already covered by citations with these interpretive relations that are explicitly framed, that are intentionally framed to give divergent points of view. Okay. So some of these, so these types that we've used here, we've developed in collaboration with sociocultural anthropologists who responded to the survey. And you can see them in the glossary here. So we have, we've started with these 6 types, right? Absence, critique, extension, incorporation, reanalysis, and refinement. And we're offering definitions of them here. And if we were to extend this to a different discipline, like say philosophy or history, we might want to have different typologies. And the current design of the tool was already, we've designed the tool with this in mind. Okay, we've made it pretty easy to reconfigure the types, even though it's not so easy at this point to merge databases and to have a sort of federated, decentralized thing. But we've made it very easy to have different deployments of Relata with easily reconfigurable types. Okay. Now, to create a relation, you have to sign in. So right now we're supporting signing via Zotero, GitHub, or Google, and we're collecting minimal information just for authentication. I'll sign in via GitHub. And once I'm signed in, I can create a relation. So the add relation button appears. And so here it randomized the article that I'm seeing again. So now we're looking at Heather's article from 2008 called Post-Posterior Cultures, the Microbiopolitics of Raw Milk Cheese in the United States. And there are also some relations here. So another thing is that, if you want to, you can also move around and look for different articles. So like say, if I want to, I can search for articles here, and it might take a second. And other works that are available in the Relata database, you can navigate through this search bar on the top right. Okay, so here's another example. You can also navigate around by clicking on, either on these results or on the network nodes, right? And so you see +1 because it says that there is one further relation involving this work, right? So if I click it, I select it, and I can also move back to the previous one. So now I'm going to show you how to create a relation. Okay, so let's create a relation on Heather's article. And let's say that, let's see. So here's what adding a relation looks like. Right? So because we were on Heather's article, it was automatically selected as the object work. And for a subject work, we can think of something that offers a like something like an extension of Heather's work, for example. So let's see. One option might be something like marine microbiopolitics. Okay, so we found this work here. See, selected. I'm gonna say that this is an extension of Heather's work, and I can annotate it by saying something along the lines of, you know, Schroeder extends Paxson's concept of microbiopol. Oh, sorry. Of microbiopolitics to examine the rhythmic life cycles of marine bacteria. Okay, whatever, something like that. So all the relations, everything in Relata is under a public domain dedication. Right? So we're trying to make it as easy to have interoperability as possible and to have other people build on our work. So yeah, you can create a relation like this, and now it will appear here. Yeah, and because I created it, I can edit it. Okay. Okay. Anyway, so so that's more or less you know, how the app works now. Right now, we're only showing explicitly, you know, we're only showing relations that have been explicitly defined by users. Okay. But the idea is that in the future, you know, in future iterations of the tool, we could have more sophisticated algorithms to extend the reach, right? And have machine inferences on things that are likely to be interesting counterpoints to things that have not been explicitly tagged. So one easy example, one simple example is, you know, suppose the same author has two works, okay, that are probably somewhat similar, right? And we know that there's an interesting critique to work A, right? But a user happened to look up work B, okay? And if it's by the same author, and if it probably reflects a similar point of view, we also might be able to show that critique to that user, okay, as potentially interesting. So that's a very simple example of a machine inference, and we probably want to start with, you know, the simpler cases, okay, as we develop the more sophisticated algorithms. And probably, I mean, one design idea is to show the inferred ones, the machine inferred ones with you know, like maybe dashed lines in the visualization instead of solid, or something like that. And I mean, as for ideas for how to so another thing so there are many things that I would be very interested in you know, having a conversation about with this group. One of them is, you know, how might we integrate Relata into existing search systems, right? So we very much see this as complementary to existing ones, not as a substitute for them, right? So, so for example, existing search tools like Google Scholar, they will often show things like cited by, okay? And we imagine that, you know, if we have interesting relations in Relata for that specific work, those interfaces could also show Relata alongside cited by, right? Another question is, you know, right now we're only having data from Crossref, and, you know, that's missing a lot of things that are important, including in sociocultural anthropology. So lots of books in particular are missing from Crossref. So what might be some alternatives? You know, like we've thought about allowing users to import from their Zotero libraries, for example. And this would allow people to import pretty much anything, including blog posts, which are very important in anthropology. But it could also produce a lot of duplicates, and we'd need some way of dealing with that, you know, so that the database wouldn't get really messy. We've also thought about adding WorldCat to Crossref and having, you know, like some integration of the two. So anyway, so we're very interested in ideas on what might be the best approach for that. And we're also interested in ideas about, you know, the potential for Relata as a teaching tool. So you know, what might be some uses in teaching for the tool. So I think think for an initial introduction, I think that's probably enough. It probably makes sense to open up for a broader conversation. Yeah, the tool is available online at relata.mit.edu, and if you're interested in our code base, it's on GitHub at github.com/relata.
That's great. Thanks, Rodrigo. There are a few questions already in the chat, so we could start with those.
Oh, okay, let me see.
So the first is about the Google form and our initial database. And I actually don't know the answer to this. Is the Google form still, is that still open? I don't think that we are entertaining more entries through that, which required a lot of manual data entry actually on Rodrigo's part. So instead, I think the idea would be to sign in directly to Relata. And that's the second question, which is the way to add new things is through adding a relation. So in other words, you have to identify a relation. We didn't want people to just like spam it with their own publications and leave, right? So the only way, you have to add a relation, but you can add a new text via creating it in relation to something that's already in the database. Is that correct?
Yeah. So right now it's not so intuitive on how to create a relation with two works that are not in the database.
Right.
Yeah. So the way to do it is that you just click add relation with any work selected, okay? And then you change the second one by clicking on.
Aha. Sneaky.
Yeah. So we're trying to think of what's a better UI for this. You know, like maybe if we move the add relation button up or something, or have a second add relation button that doesn't seem tied to the publication and opens with a with nothing selected. And anyway, for now, the way to do it is as I've demonstrated.
Great.
Yeah.
So thank you for this. This is so exciting. Really excited for this project, and thank you for the presentation. I'm an affiliate in MIT Literature, working on a project called MIT Global Shakespeare. It is video-based, and it's about video. It's about videos of adaptations of Shakespeare worldwide. We envision an interface similar to yours in terms of a web-like interrelations. It's not hierarchical and it's not linear. So seeing this, it is just so inspiring. I was wondering if you can, instead of manually entering, maybe I missed some part of what you're saying. Can you not automate it and just import automatically from all the existing scholarly bibliographies and have some algorithm internally to sort through them? If you import at scale, beyond anthropology, there are a lot of bibliographies out there, and I wonder if you could reach some agreement with some of them, and then we will reach scale. We'll have a lot of them, and is your algorithm still able to, for example, plot out this tree-like, web-like structure for each item, because just need to look at what they cite, right?
So yeah, we've done we've thought a lot about ways of like doing automatic detection of these kinds of like interesting critical relations. So there are some projects out there that are trying to infer like citation types, right, from using machine learning. So one example is the project Cite, SCITE. And what they're trying to do is I mean, they're concerned with issues like veracity. I think that's the framing they use. So they do a more kind of binary sentiment analysis on citations, just to see if there is agreement or disagreement, right? If there and that's the kind of classification that they're going for. So they're very interested in doing that for science papers to see if, like a particular scientific result is contested. And I mean, our purpose is a little different. I mean, we're, epistemologically, it's a little different, right? We're interested in pluralism and critique, and we want to expose people to different points of view. It's not so much a matter of, like, is there scientific consensus on this? So that's why we're focusing on humanistic literature in particular, and these particular kinds of critical relations and divergent points of view. I tend to think that well, at least so far, we haven't been able to come up with a way to automatically infer this from data that's out there, right? Because I mean, one of the reasons is that it is the way in which it doesn't align with citation, right? And another reason is that a lot of these things are really nuanced. So if you look at the responses that, to our survey, people would say, oh, back in the 1980s, there was this debate going on, and like everyone kind of knew. And I was trying to make an implicit move that would offer an intervention there, but it was, but it was not explicitly framed as such, and so it's very difficult to detect things like that, I think. Oh yeah, and yeah. Header notes, we're also interested in tracking absences, right? Yeah, so overlooked opportunities for citation. So we are very much open to finding, these kinds of things through automated methods, but I think so far we've been skeptical of any technique that anything that we've come up with so far. So if you have ideas, if anyone has ideas, we very much welcome them. Yeah.
And
but,
I absolutely love your idea. I love your idea of tracking absences. I know in anthropological terms, the archival silence in itself is meaningful as much as evidence. And that's just brilliant. I look at your glossary. Those terms are new to me, but just so important.
Thank you. Other questions that people are, or please, sorry, go ahead.
Yes. So on the topic of absences, so this is great. I'm really enjoying learning about this this framework. I think it's really important to include diverse voices. But the fact that it's, so I'm trying to think in terms of global diversity. Are you guys thinking about including sources from different languages? So as a linguist, my work, so I look at lots of knowledge produced elsewhere outside of the US, in Haiti, in Africa, around different languages. So what I see so far is mostly work produced in the US in English. So are you thinking of including other languages that might actually really tackle this question of absences?
So we're very interested in that. That was one of the like initial motivations for the project, right? Was to tag work that was in languages other than English, from works from periodicals from the global South, so that scholars in the global North would be exposed to them too, right? So right now, I mean, some of the examples in Relata do tag texts from texts in languages other than English and from periodicals from the global South. So one example is the Helmrich one, right? In which there's work from Brazil and Italy being tagged, and work in Spanish also already being tagged. Now, one current limitation is that we're fully dependent on Crossref, right? On what's available for Crossref, and a lot of some periodicals from that includes a lot of works from the global South and periodicals from the global South, because a lot of them also do have DOIs. But if we wanted to, like really expand it, that's also part of the question of integrating different databases. So one example would be, a lot of journals from a lot of serials from Latin America which do not have DOIs are in this database called Cielo, okay, which was this non-profit indexing collaboration in the 90s between lots of Latin American countries. So we would have to integrate that, for example. So yeah, anyway, so we're interested in that. And one of the, and something that intersects the algorithmic question, right, is that, I mean, as we were working on Relata, there were also, you know, we also ended up working on tangential ideas, you know, having to do with this, you know, with finding works in languages other than English and in the global South. So I think I can, let me see. I don't know, I'm not sure if this is online, but I will try, okay? I'll just give a demonstration of one of the things that were kind of side products from Relata, okay? Okay, hyperquery. Let's see if this is up. Oh, all right, okay, this is up. So this was one of the Relata side products, okay? So we were trying to find this, find works, especially in languages other than English and in periodicals from the global South that engage with counter-hegemonic intellectual traditions by producing these Boolean queries that would combine curated terms with machine translations of the terms that you're searching for. So for example, if I were to search for linguistics, for works on linguistics and metaphor that engage with queer theory, it would produce, yeah, so the tool would produce, yeah, you know, this yeah, Boolean query on the right, in which the pink terms are machine translations of the terms that I typed, right? And the purple terms are curated terms that tend to pick out works in these kinds of counter-hegemonic traditions in specific languages, right? So it's difficult to do that with machine translation, and you basically, to do this prototype, we just asked our friends. So you know, you're familiar with, you know, the queer theory scene in Russia. What are the terms in Russia that tend to tag that literature? Okay, and we started compiling those.
Right. But what I noticed is that most of the languages are still European languages. So which will again introduce yet another bias that will exclude.
That's definitely a limitation. Yes, yeah. And there's also limitation that a lot of indigenous languages and non-colonial languages, non-state sanctioned languages don't even have easily available machine translation. Yeah. Yeah. So that's definitely a big concern.
Actually, Google Translate does pretty well, actually. So, for example, there's lots of Asian Creole that can be translated via Google Translate. So I wonder whether there's any chance to connect this effort with the range of languages that Google Translate can work with. That might be a way to expand the range of communities being included, is to use, you know, Google Translate databases. Yeah, no, absolutely. That is very interesting. I mean, if I'm not sure if, you know, how much this particular side project from Relata will be expanded. I mean, this was just a proof of concept, right? But if it were, we would definitely want to include as many languages as possible, and to move beyond the state-sanctioned and colonial ones. I mean, yeah, anyone who happens to have situated contextual knowledge on the best search terms in those languages, we would very much welcome their contributions and try to acknowledge them in the, you know, in the best way possible. Yeah. Anyway. This is great. Congratulations.
So right now, right, the database which we launched with just this pilot, very small, very modest database, right? We're just trying to continue to crowdsource manually new relations and works. And so I'd love suggestions for ways of doing that. We do have, we are planning to do basically a Relata-a-thon at the Social Studies of Science and Society meetings in the fall. We're putting in a proposal this week for that. I think we could do that at other conferences and target conferences that are based in the Global South, right? Regional anthropology meetings and other conferences. Another way, though, is through teaching, right? And trying to get colleagues to incorporate this as a class project or assignment or something, and have students in a class think through the implications of this, but then very much generate these new relations, because it's all manual right now. It will contain whatever people put in it.
Could I ask a follow-up question about that? Because I was really fascinated by the teaching potential of this resource. You can sort of envision not only like one class doing mapping, right, but having an evolving bibliography every time you teach the class, right? You introduce new work, students make the web more complex. And then if you can, I mean, perhaps you can then draw on all of your users, right, to create a composite database, right? Like you can sort of envision an ecosystem. My question was, can people disagree with the way that a resource has been tagged? Just because it is manual, I would wonder about that aspect.
I think that one way that it would easily work is for somebody to see that and say, Sundarajan is an incorporation? I don't think so. I think it's an extension. And they could just add it in next to it with a different relation, right? I don't think that there would be anything stopping that from happening, right, Rodrigo?
No, yeah, there's nothing stopping that from happening, and in fact, I think that's a good thing. If people, if multiple people tag the same, the relation between the same texts with different interpretations, I think that would be fabulous. So right now, the app does support that. So like if I were to, okay, let's see. If I were to say that Franklin 2006, right, might take a while because of Crossref. Okay, yeah. So if I say that this is I actually think that this is an incorporation. I disagree. Sorry. Yeah, it just adds an additional arrow to the same.
Nice.
Yeah.
That's really cool. That's really cool. And then you can sort of envision, right, like if undertaken at scale, right, if the tendency is towards one or the other, right, like that one, I don't know, that the font gets bolder or the arrow gets a stronger weight or something like that. But crowdsourcing knowledge as sort of accumulating visually, which sounds
nice.
I would love to do this. And I think Sarah Eicher had a similar question. Sorry, I didn't mean to.
Let's see. Sorry, yeah, I was not looking at the chat. Sorry.
As long as it's in Crossref, that's the limitation right now. So probably not.
Yeah. So right now it's only things in Crossref. But if there are, if there are other databases that you think would be helpful to include, we're definitely open to that. Yeah. So the code is also open source, so anyone could make a fork of Relata and switch the database. Right? And we're also very much open to including other databases in this main deployment under MIT.edu. Yeah.
That's terrific. So we have a couple of hands. Timothy Lowe, would you like to ask a question?
Hi, yeah. Thanks so much for this, Rodrigo. I think it's really cool. Glad to hear this is happening. I'm a little bit curious also. So it seems like there isn't, like when people do these relations, you're also not tracking who the people who are doing these relations are. Is that right? I know there was one that was like Marcel Laflamme was writing there. But anyway, I just asked because I mean I think it's interesting to think about who is doing in some ways this labor, right? And also I think that also links in with this question that sorry, Eliza was it? Who was Erica? Sorry, who was asking about like you know, if people disagree about certain representations, I think it also has to do often with their own positionality, or like how they are kind of positioning their work in the literature. So I'm just curious about that. But this is really cool. As glad we got to talk on Monday, and I'm glad to see this now too.
Yeah. Okay. So the yeah. So right now, for the relations that have been added from the survey, right, we've added the names after, you know, like, you know, in the annotation itself, right? But if you add a relation now, like I did here with the incorporation by serif linking, your name, the name should appear. Yeah, should appear on the left, and that's whatever you choose. So I just chose Rodrigo, but if I wanted, I could switch my display name to whatever I want. Yeah.
Great. Okay. Alexa, did you have another question?
Oh, just a quick thought while listening to you about crowdsourcing. I engage in a lot of crowdsourcing myself. It just suddenly occurred to me, is there a risk of, I know crowdsourcing sounds democratic and we assume democracy means collected wisdom. What if there are cases when it is not? Could there be some kind of, you set out to oppose imperial cultural imperialism, kind of some kind of imposition, right? In bibliography, what if people disagree, or maybe the blind spot remains in people's mapping out of these relations? And often we see that as a persistent force in some fields. You know, some are just conservative, or they continue to fail to see. And so the result of our crowdsourcing will simply reflect that. Of course, I mean, if you have a large enough number of people, maybe we can minimize that. It's just, this is a question for our own project too, you know, crowdsourcing. What do we get? Do we transcend the biases always?
It's not a given, that's for sure. It's a project to be worked at continuously.
Yeah. So the way I think about it is that the relation will reflect the biases of whomever chooses to come to Relata and add their relations. So the best that we can do is just try to frame it and say, hey, like, this is an interpretive exercise. Like, feel free to disagree with the author's intentions. We're trying to encourage people to map relations of these particular types. Right? Yeah. So the best that we can do is to try to encourage certain kinds of mapping and to frame the exercise. But at this point, we don't really know what people will make of it. Yeah.
Well, I think that's one of the incredible opportunities. You're thinking about classrooms and conferences, right? Maybe if you can really be intentional about the range of conferences that you're engaging, right? That could be one way to kind of balance out from a variety of perspectives that are explicitly positioned as such, right? Like kind of working to ensure diversity structurally through the communities on which you're drawing. I think sounds really incredible. I wonder if some of the, oh yes, we have another question. AJ Ternator, please go ahead.
Just a quick question. It seems like the addition of more bases to the pool from WordCat or wherever is possible would be a very positive next step to take. And I was wondering, where are you guys with that? It doesn't have to be WorldCat, but extending the bases is in your minds. Heather's been mentioning it and you've been mentioning it. What have you done so far, or what are your intentions in terms of next steps on that point?
So we've looked, so far we've looked into how would it work, how might it work to integrate WorldCat and Zotero. Okay? So these were the these are the two that we've looked into from the technical side. and also Cielo, the Latin American bibliographic database. So in the Zotero case, the way in which it could work would be, if you have a Zotero account associated with your Relata user, you would be able to add you would be able to add relations involving works that are in your Zotero library, right? So that would be a way of expanding it to potentially anything. And so, like if you find a blog post, if you find, a white paper somewhere, a web page that doesn't have a DOI, you would be able to add it by importing it into your Zotero library, associating your Zotero account to Relata, and then we would make it available. So that's one possibility that we thought about. Another possibility we thought about would be to try to use the WorldCat API to have simultaneous searching into Crossref and WorldCat. Cielo doesn't seem to have an easily usable API, but there are technically there are ways of integrating it too. So the main technical challenge for integrating different databases is to deal with basically matching items across databases and dealing with duplicates. Right? So if they have DOIs, that's easier. But lots of books, lots of minor variations on books have different ISBNs, right? So you can't entirely rely on that. So you would need some sort of like algorithmic method for matching the different words. Now, right now we have a really simple type of similarity check, in the current code, but it's not quite there. It's not good enough. Basically, the algorithm we have is too simple, and it's not good enough to, that if we added Zotero or WorldCat right now, like you would.
And another alternative would be maybe HathiTrust as well. I mean, it's a consortium of libraries and might be interested in this experimental and very useful exercise, sure.
Yeah, that's a great idea.
So don't give up.
I was about to say, AJ, that's a great idea. They have I believe they have a fellows program, right? So you might be able to apply to work in that capacity, and then also achieve the greater distribution. That's a great idea.
Right.
Yeah, that is a great idea. And if anyone has pointers on existing open source software for doing this kinds of bibliographic matching, I would be very happy. I would be very happy to see it, because I'm pretty sure we're not the first people to face this problem.
The only other kind of similar, but this quite different actually than what your aims are, as far as I understand it, was the open syllabi project. There are some similarities in there, but they don't obviously that decolonizing angle that you guys do. But in terms of incorporating more and alerting them for more things and maybe collaborating with them, maybe that's the only other alternative that I thought. But I'm sure there are others.
So that's a good idea.
Sorry. Oh, so sorry. I was just going to say one that occurred to me is Ken Alba unfortunately had to go, but his work, the DH Labs work on the gender analysis toolkit, I believe is going to increasingly incorporate a metadata component that may be user defined, right? So I'm wondering if, obviously this is a bit of an extension from what you've done already. So you might not want to overcomplicate it, right? This might not be a good idea. But thinking about ways, when I was thinking about the keywords that you would use, right? Keywords in different languages that are sort of helping to trace the boundaries of a discursive category, right? Maybe those could be used, right, to help enrich the perspective, right? Like maybe that could be drawn upon. I'm not quite sure how to suggest this yet, but I do think that may rapidly become a parallel project. That
is very interesting. So when we did the survey in early 2019, we did include a question, right? That was it was the last question here. Let's see. considering how conversations in anthropology have developed since the publication of your article, what keywords would you want to associate with your work today? Right? So yeah, so we were trying to ask these questions to, to create, to have a sense of associations between literatures that are, that may be relevant to each other and may pose interesting contrasting points of view, but that, have for whatever reason, for historical reasons, have happened to be tagged with different keywords. Right? So I think that that's particularly helpful in the case of connecting conversations in different languages. Yeah. But so we got interesting responses from that survey, but we didn't. Yeah, we didn't do much work in going off that branch into developing digital tools. Yeah.
It still sounds like it's an incredible, I mean, it really is an incredible intervention. And I'm so thrilled that you presented this today. I know that there had been quite a lot of interest within the library. So I just wanted to invite questions from the libraries, just because we have a number of librarians in attendance, just to provide a space for that for just a second. We may still all be percolating. That's certainly absolutely possible. So with that, I think let's just thank Rodrigo and Heather for joining us today, unless you have final thoughts that you'd like to bring forward or questions you would like to ask the audience.
Just invite you to get on there and poke around and add relations.
Well, and also give us feedback and let us know what you think. So yeah, you can also email us. I'm at ochigame@mit.edu.
Edu. Oh, my apologies for my malfunctioning keyboard. Okay. Well, with that, thank you all so much for joining us, for your incredibly thoughtful comments, and for a really fantastic presentation. Thank you so much. Please join me in
thank you.
Right.
Thank